The first sound Elias Crowe heard was her crying, thin and torn, carried across the grass like smoke from a dying fire, and it struck him so sudden he pulled his horse to a stop hard enough to make the animal snort and sidestep, the sun hanging low and cruel behind her, and there she was on the open plain near the broken headstones of an old cholera graveyard. A young woman curled in on herself with a torn dress clutched to her chest, her knees drawn up, her hair matted with dust and blood, and when she looked up at him, her eyes held a panic so raw it hollowed something in his chest. He hadn't known was still alive, and before he could speak, she whispered through shaking breath, "Don't come closer," as if the words were the last fence between her and something worse, and Elias dismounted slow, palms open, the way a man does with a wounded animal, aware of his own size, his boots, his shadow, aware that the West had taught women to fear first and hope later. And he said softly he wasn't going to hurt her, that his name was Elias, and he ran cattle south of Red Willow Creek. And the wind carried the lie of calm in his voice, though his mind raced with the way her legs trembled and the dark stains on the cloth wrapped around her. And she shook her head as if the sound of his voice scraped her raw, and she cried, "I'm not clean anymore," the words spilling out like a confession forced at gunpoint. And something in her tone told him she wasn't speaking of dirt or blood, but of a theft that could not be seen and could not be returned. And the world narrowed to the space between them as he knelt, careful not to touch, and told her that clean wasn't a thing a man could take, that no one had the right to decide her worth but her own, though even as he said it, he knew words were thin blankets against a cold like this. And she sobbed harder, saying they'd come at dusk, 3 of them, said her name was Clara Wynn, and she'd been traveling to her aunt's place after her father died of, that the road had seemed safe, that the sky had been pink and kind. And Elias felt the old anger rise, the one that lived in his bones since the war, the one that made his hands itch for violence. And he forced it down because it wasn't what she needed. Not yet. And when he asked if she was hurt, she hesitated, then nodded, and the way she held herself told him more than her words ever could, and he asked if he could help, if he could see. And she flinched so hard she nearly tipped over, clutching the cloth tighter and crying, "Please don't look." And Elias swallowed, thinking of his mother dying alone in a storm, of promises broken by distance and pride, of how the land kept score whether a man wanted it to or not, and he told Clara he would only do what she allowed, that he'd turn away if she asked, that she was in charge of what happened next, and slowly, trembling like a fawn learning its legs. She nodded once, a permission given not with trust but with exhaustion, and he turned his eyes to the horizon as she loosened the cloth with shaking fingers, the sound of fabric rasping loud as thunder in the quiet field. And when she said, "You can look now," he did, and the sight stole the breath from his chest and drained the color from his face, because the injuries were not just the bruises blooming dark along her thighs and ribs, but the crude marks burned and cut into her skin, symbols carved by men who wanted to leave proof they had been there, a brand of cruelty, meant to last longer than pain. And Elias felt bile rise, felt his vision blur, felt the world tilt as if the ground itself rejected what had been done, and he forced himself to breathe, because fainting would help no one. And Clara watched his face, searching it for judgment, for disgust, for confirmation of the thing she feared most, and she whispered, "You see," as if that settled her fate. And he shook his head, his voice rough, telling her he saw wounds, not sins, that no mark could make, her less than she was. But even as he said it, he knew the West would not be so kind, that towns had long memories and sharp tongues, that a woman marked by violence was often punished twice, and he made a decision as heavy as iron, telling her he would take her to his ranch, that his sister-in-law knew herbs and stitches, that no one would touch her without her say. And Clara laughed once, broken and bitter, saying men always said that until the night came. And Elias stood, stepped back, unbuckled his gun belt, and laid it on the ground between them, like an offering, telling her he would ride ahead with his hands visible if she wanted, that she could take the gun if it made her feel safer. And the trust that flickered in her eyes was fragile as frost, but it was there, and she nodded again. And as he helped her onto his horse, careful, slow, every movement announced, he felt the weight of what he was carrying, not just in his arms but in his soul, because the men who had done this, were still out there, because the law would shrug or look away, because helping her meant inviting their wrath and the judgment of a world that preferred its women silent and unmarked. And as they rode toward the sinking sun, Clara sagging against the saddle horn, whispering prayers to a god she wasn't sure still wanted her. Elias glanced back once and saw dust on the horizon, a thin line moving where no wind should be, and his heart tightened with the knowledge that destiny had already begun to close its fist around them, and whatever waited ahead would demand a price neither of them yet understood. By the time night fell like a heavy curtain over the plains, Elias Crowe had already chosen the kind of man he would have to be to see this through, and that choice rode with him like a second shadow as he led Clara into the low-lit safety of his ranch house, the lamp glow trembling against the walls as if even the light knew fear. And his sister-in-law, Maeve, a woman carved from grief and endurance since burying her husband, looked once at Clara's face and then did not ask questions that would break what little strength remained, only set to work with warm water and steady hands, while Elias stood outside listening to the night breathe, every creak of wood and whisper of wind sounding like boots in the dark. And when Maeve finally emerged with blood on her sleeves and resolve in her eyes, she told him Clara would live, that the wounds would close, though the scars would speak long after the pain was gone. And Elias nodded, knowing some scars were meant to speak because silence was how evil survived. And when Clara woke near dawn, she asked where she was, and he told her the truth, that she was safe for now, that no one would touch her without her consent. And she studied him with eyes dulled by hurt but sharpened by instinct, asking what he wanted in return. And the question cut him deeper than any blade because it revealed the lesson the world had taught her. And he answered simply that he wanted nothing, that sometimes a man did a thing because not doing it would rot him from the inside. And over the next days, Clara learned the rhythm of the ranch, the way morning light crept gentle through the window, the way Elias always knocked before entering, the way Maeve spoke to her like a person instead of a burden. And in those quiet spaces between pain and sleep, something fragile took root. Not hope exactly, but the idea that the future might not be entirely closed. Yet destiny has a way of collecting debts, and on the fourth night the dust Elias had seen returned, with purpose, hooves thundering, voices sharp with drink and entitlement, and Elias felt the old war self rise, the one that knew how to move when fear wanted him frozen. And he told Maeve to take Clara to the cellar and bar the door, and Clara grabbed his sleeve, terror flaring, whispering that they would kill him, that he should let her go because she was not worth the blood. And Elias knelt, so they were eye to eye, and told her worth was not measured by what men stole, but by what a soul refused to surrender. And he stepped out into the yard as the riders dismounted. 3 men, laughter sour and confident, one bearing a knife that glinted in the moonlight like a promise kept too often. And they recognized Elias, sneered at the rancher who thought himself better than the rest, demanding the girl, calling her property, and something in Elias broke cleanly then. Not in rage, but in clarity. And he told them no, a word that fell heavy and final, and the first shot cracked the night. Open, the horse screaming, the second shot answered, and time slowed into a series of choices made without hesitation. Elias moving with the certainty of a man who had already paid his dues to violence and would not flinch from paying again if it meant ending a cycle. And when the smoke cleared, 2 men lay still and the third crawled away into the grass, wounded and howling, carrying with him the knowledge that some lines could not be crossed without consequence. And as dawn broke pink and quiet over the land, Clara emerged from the cellar shaking and saw Elias sitting on the porch with blood on his hands that was not all his own, and she sank beside him, not touching at first, then resting her head against his shoulder, and neither spoke because words would have cheapened the truth of what had passed. And in the weeks that followed, Clara healed in the ways that could be seen and in the slower ways that could not, learning to ride again, learning to laugh in small, surprised bursts, learning that the marks on her skin did not define the shape of her soul. And when a traveling preacher came through and spoke of sin and redemption, Clara stood tall and left the tent before the sermon could wound her anew, choosing her own measure of grace. And Elias watched her with a quiet pride, understanding that love did not always arrive as a promise of forever, but sometimes as the refusal to let another person be erased. And one evening, as the sun bled gold across the fields, Clara told him she would be leaving, that there was a town east where a woman ran a boarding house and needed help, a place where she could begin again, not as a victim, but as a woman with a future, and Elias felt the familiar ache of letting go. But he nodded, telling her the door would always remain open, that some places stayed home even when you walked away, and when she rode out the next morning, straight-backed and unafraid. She turned once and smiled. A smile earned the hard way, and Elias stood watching until she was a line on the horizon, knowing their paths had crossed, not by accident, but by a fate that demanded courage from them both. And as the wind moved through the grass like a whisper of approval, he understood that stories like these were not meant to be forgotten, because in remembering them, we remember what it costs to choose mercy in a brutal world. And if this story stirred something in you, if you believe the West was shaped not only by guns, but by choices of the heart, then stay with us, subscribe to Western Destiny Tales, and walk these hard roads with us again, because there are still many fates left to be told.